Yes, yes, of course, yeah, because my slides are in English. So, good morning to everybody. I don't need to introduce myself further, but I want to highlight that I'm not here to lead any military operation. These uniforms are just because we are doing flying activity, and we will go back as soon as we finish this presentation to do the little flying that the budget allows old people to have. So I'm here basically because of three things. The first one is the word governance. Governance means collective action to be governed. And collective action to be governed means leadership to do it. And this is definitely a field of interest of mine. The second thing that leads me here are you, the young guys. You are just the first of a row of an innovative project which I deeply believe in. And the plain truth is that beyond any rhetoric, you are the future. This sounds like, obvious or feel like maybe empty. Some may sound like that, but it is the plain truth. And I am the commander of the Air Force Academy, where the Air Force prepares its leaders, and I deeply believe in this mission. And when I can contribute a little to the development of future leaders, contribute, highlight the work, I do it very willingly. The third thing that leads me here is Professor Piga. I had the pleasure to work with him in the past in a very innovative, very agile way, very high quality way. And these are things that cannot be passed when you have the chance to interact in such a domain. So I am honored to be here, and beyond really any rhetoric. So what we want to do now is to do some exposing of concepts and experiences that I could accumulate in this 37 and more years of career, and then to propose some perspectives, and especially to chat with you about what are your perceptions, of course, but especially the kids here, because from this interaction comes a very high added value. So there are some barriers. One barrier is the language barrier, of course, but I think you should manage, since the whole course is in English, and I will try to manage too, even though my English has been neglected in the last 3 years because of the German, which is much more difficult. And then the other barriers are the age barrier, maybe the institutional barrier, but I hope that you will perceive that these barriers have no reason to exist, and we can go across them to get value out of this time that we invest. Okay, now everything was working fine. Okay, here we are. So this is the very kind advertisement that I got. Now let's get to one very important point. We are here speaking about governance, collective action, leadership in English. But I like very much to do that in Italian, because we are behind in this field. we can. We have all the intellectual resources to invest and to become part of international debate in this field. So the focus that, for example, the Air Force puts on these issues today is an investment to catch up. And we are having great results from this investment, even in the short term. Our country needs to invest much more in this field. We are behind. And just to highlight that, I use this example. In the Inuit language, the one in Greenland, there are many names for snow, ice, and their colors. There is a nice thriller, which is Smilla's Sense for the snow, which describes maybe 12 or 13, I don't remember, different names for white and snow. And for us, it's beyond, of course, any conception. Why? Because this is a tool. The language is a tool of a culture, and that is something that you need to work and to perceive important things, for your life. In Italian, there is no good equivalent for the word leadership. I tried to find one. I did like a little research. There is no real good equivalent, and we have to use this word. Okay, let's use this word, but let's fill it with our thinking, not just borrow thinking. When we borrow thinking, because sometimes we don't even borrow thinking about that. Okay, so to recap, why are we here? Now we are having some, but we are agile, and we are here to discuss about leadership, that is collective action and its governance, and we want to do that taking into account one particular frame of reference later on, which is the complexity perspective. And I will say later why this particular perspective. And we want to do that in close relation to your ideas and experiences. So again, speak up if you have to say anything. Just raise your hand. We can stop our discussion, our presentation. And if you have doubts, this is a very good way to add value. And this, we don't care about the whole thing that I prepared. I mean, we can also cut, be flexible, change topics, and also speak about something else. Because today I have no idea to get a complete course on leadership, strategic leadership, and so on. This is a primer for you to get curious about what you will have to explore later during your career. I always say to my students that there is no such a thing as education. There is only self-education. What we can do is to support your self-education. So the idea is to give you a primer on some concepts and to get you curious so that you can develop yourself later on. Okay. We will start from very far away, and we want to give you an idea, an emotional idea, through a short video of one of the topics that we want to address. Please. Okay, why did we look at this thing? Because there you can see the very fundamentals of the collective action, of the social animal, and of leadership. This anthropological approach needs some time thinking. To do that, I need some help. Can you help me? Please get this end of the tape and go far away, because we need about 7 meters. Okay, 5, 6, 7, that's enough. These 7 meters show, you can go on the right of the screen as much as possible. These 7 meters show roughly the evolutionary history of ourselves, from the very remote, ancestors to today. 1 meter is 1 million years. We transitioned to tool making about 2.5 meters ago. And we transitioned to hunting about 2 meters ago. For the whole time, we lived in small groups like that. From when we were ape-like creatures to when we became more sophisticated hunters, gatherers. And in the last especially in the last 2 meters, in the last 2 millions of years, you can, come back there. Okay. We don't need the father, okay, like that is okay. 2 meters. Hunting has been a very important driving factor for our behaviors, and went down in our genes. And the small group was always the basic entity in which we lived. The survival of our ancestors was only related to the capability to work in groups, to coordinate the effort. And hunting was a very special cooperative effort, which could not be led only through very rigid hierarchy, but needed cooperation, needed initiative, needed a series of collective behavior, where the leader, which was the catalyst of this collective action, was the first among peers, and not the dictator of the group. So this is very important to understand, because the fundamental dynamics which are ingrained in our genes come from there. To understand better that, you must consider that this type of lifestyle was led for about, until the, exactly like that, until the agricultural revolution. The very first beginning of it was 1 centimeter ago. At our latitude, about 5 millimeters ago. And the transition to our very complex world, we can trace that back to about 2/10 of millimeters ago, which is the Industrial Revolution. And the Information Revolution, you need a microscope to see it on the scale. So for more than 99.5% of our evolutionary life, we live in small groups, and all the dynamics, the fundamental dynamics of our relation are based upon small group dynamics of a special kind, of a hunting kind, which is a cooperative kind and a more horizontal type of relation. Thank you, you can do it there. Now, with the agricultural revolution, of course, the economists know that much better than me, there has been a fundamental change. Our ancestors would settle, could build more technology, heavier technology, pottery, and so on. And the first division of labor, the first structuring, hierarchical structuring of the society started, and so on and so forth. But this happened very recently, very, very recently. And in any case, as somebody said, one gentleman of the 18th century was closer to Caesar legionnaires as his descendants, let's say, 2 generations later. This is important to understand. Let's go ahead. And why do we care about that? You can say, why are we talking about that? Because that's us. And in our big organizations, the big problem we have is to translate these dynamics, which are ingrained in ourselves, into a much different context. We recap, where do we come from? Early man lived in a simple world, relatively simple, because with a limited time horizon to the next hunting season, in a small group life, 20, 30 individuals, it's very important that you focus on the intensity of this relation. Life and death were directly dependent on this relation. And they would know each other extremely well because they were spending most of their lives together. There was a very high trust among them. And this is something that we are deprived of today. And it's important to understand. They had a simple economy, gathering, hunting, and elementary tool making. Their life was very physically active, challenging, hard and short, because of what you saw there. But this is just a fictional example, but many of situations of that kind would occur. This is evident from the archaeological findings and so on. Let's go ahead. What kind of inference we get from this perspective, anthropological perspective? The inference is that today, like 1 million years ago, like 100,000 years ago, we need group interaction. And this need is very often not fulfilled today. We need effective leadership because these are also many studies there are also many studies that show that if there is no leadership in a group, a spontaneous leadership arises. And this is again a very deep need to have some kind of coordination of the collective action. and we'll see that later a little bit. But we need close leaders, leaders who are close to us emotionally, relationally, because this is the ancestral model. We need collaboration and attention to people, because this is the model, again, that is in our genes. And this is a very fundamental issue. This is the fundamental issue. We need what the scholars call a perception of justice and fairness in the organization, which is nothing else as an ethic. What is an ethic? What is ethics? It's not some moral rules, abstract moral rules. Ethics are principles and mechanisms to reconcile the interest of the individual with the interest of the group. So it's a balancing mechanism which has nothing not necessarily a moral value. And ethics do that through the solution to what it is called the prisoner's dilemma. I think economists are familiar with the games theory, or not?
Yes, but they are not.
Okay, they haven't
done strategy yet.
Okay, anyway, in this interesting, I must say, field of study, the games theory, which we will not get into, there is one specific model which is called the prisoner's dilemma. And it really works, because I actually found myself in this very case, as an investigator, let's say. There are two people who committed a crime of some kind, and they are arrested. And they are separated right away, because this is something that must be done, so that you can interrogate them separately and see what says what, who says what. And that means that you want to have them contradict themselves. So what is the dilemma? That the prisoners, which are separated, know if they keep their pact, keep their compact, let's say, and do not betray their colleague, their friend, and both do that, they will have an advantage, because their defensive thesis will be strong. But if one of the two does not cooperate, and we have this repentance phenomenon, repentiti, and betrays the other one, he defects from his peer, and he gets an advantage. The other one has the dilemma, what do I do? Each of them has the dilemma, what do I do? Do I cooperate, or do I defect? If I defect, I get an advantage for sure. If I cooperate, we may get a better advantage together. How do you solve this dilemma? The driving factor is one, is trust. How much you trust your peer, your colleague. And if the trust is low, the rational choice is to defect and to sell your mate. Why I take this, I spend some precious time on this example, because this is the basic mechanism which drives collective action, and is the basic issue of leadership. Ensuring trust among the group, ensuring a perception of justice and fairness in the organization. In our culture, this is absolutely not perceived. And this has the effects that we all see. When you're up on a road, why should I park in the parking lot which is far away, if I can park here, maybe in second row, and nothing happens? If I do that and the other don't do it, if I cooperate and the other defect, I am what in Rome is called presso. And this dynamic happens millions of times every day in a culture where this focusing on the ethical problem as a social, functional problem is not high on the agenda. I've been 3 years in Germany, and they are no better than us from many, many respects. But the general trust in what the others do is much higher. And this, at a systemic level, has a very, very strong effect. This is the reason why, even if I hate it, I spend all the time that is needed to ensure trust, for good or for bad, because in my organization, because trust is not necessarily something that comes out of your heart. Trust can and must be enforced if there is no other way. And enforced means that if there are some rules which dictate cooperation, and somebody violates those rules, then there must be a direct and swift penalty. And this is not a bureaucratic mindset. This is a strategic issue of the collective action. This is why in my first 4 months of command, I spent so much time, much more than I ever wanted, on repressing some behaviors. Not because I like it, but because it is absolutely necessary to ensure cooperation, to ensure trust in the following of the rules, which the rules basically said, if they are good rules, of course, and not all, this is not always the case, these rules ensure this balancing between the interest of the individual and the interest of the broader community. Okay, so there are questions about that, considerations. One very interesting exercise is to find in your own everyday life this prisoner's dilemma. Paying taxes, parking, throwing things on the garbage on the ground. Please.
Just one question. Why do you think that today this sense of trust is not perceived?
Okay. Here in Italy, you mean? Or generally speaking?
Generally speaking.
No. There are two. First of all, there is nothing absolute in human things. So when we say sense of trust is always relative. Also in Germany, there are many defections. This may sound strange, but I've lived there 3 years and I found many, many, many defections. But these many defections were at a level which would not hamper greater processes. Because the bottom line was a higher trust level. So trust is relative. Trust can be also described like compliance to rules, which may be spontaneous or enforced. So it depends by many factors. One for sure, and now we'll see that, one basic problem is that we are made to know people, to look each other in the eyes. We feel gratified when we have very strong group experiences. I can assure you that, because in the military we have much more chance to experience this kind of settings. But the basic problem is to translate, to bring this kind of dynamics to the big organization. We will see that. So there is a basic problem of trust, because we interact continuously with many people which we don't know and which we cannot trust because we don't know. This is the basic problem. Then there is a relative problem in any culture. In our culture, we have a good problem about this, which has historical roots. And in the book that I wrote, there is also an historical frame of reference which tries to account of why in Italy we have a lower level of compliance than in other cultures, and higher than in other cultures, of course, because if you go to Africa, for example, you will find different dynamics, which, by the way, is very well explained by this model. Yeah, please.
I wanted to ask you that, do you think that the behavior of the citizens or people reflects the behavior of its leadership? Maybe they do not trust the leadership, or...
This is very interesting. Very interesting. This is the kind of interaction that I like, because that brings me also to different paths, and it's I've much enrichment by this kind of discussion. In Italy, we have a problem like that, a lack of trust, especially a lack of trust in the political leadership. And it's like, there is a feedback ring. And it's a process that, unfortunately, feeds itself. And this is what is important. There is a way to break this loop, this feedback loop. And the loop is, if the leadership is an expression of the country, and our leaders are very often taken by the very different context, not always prepared, very often not well prepared. We have a problem of quality of the leadership in general intended. But then this leadership should also drive the development of itself and of further leadership. You see what I mean? So one issue is the leadership comes from the country. If the quality of this leadership of the country is not particularly, good with relation to some issues, for example, cooperation, compliance, and so on, of course the leadership will reflect that. But the leadership doesn't come only from, poor domains, poor in the sense of culturally, and comes also from good elites. And these elites have the task to lead a change in the leadership. The basic, I'm convinced, why I'm here, one of the reasons I'm here, and one of the reasons, because I love my job in the Academy, is because I can give a contribution to the development of this leadership, which is the very core issue of this country, and which is, by the way, largely neglected in any political agenda. So, I don't know if that answer in first approximation. Okay. Now I would go further, because now we go to the organizational dimension, from the small group to the organizational dimension. Please. Ethics, we have said, is needed to produce trust. And it is the essence and the extraordinary multiplier of the effectiveness of the collective action. If you have worked in a high trust team, you understand what I mean. What you can achieve in a high trust team has no comparison with any other bureaucratic or regardless of resources that you have at your disposal. Our leadership mechanisms, we have very cursory discussed that they come from, their roots are in very high trust, small group dynamics. I want to highlight, one step back, I want to highlight that, for example, in the military, this model is very, very well reproduced, especially, for example, for special forces or for flying squadrons. Special forces, there are a small group, about 10 people, 9, 10 people, which is very close to the hunter-gatherers band. They have an extremely close relation. And the value of this relation, this trust, is so high to lead to some irrational choices. That means that a squad of special forces never leaves one behind, even if they risk the whole squad. That is not rational, because these are very, very costly, high training assets. And it's not rational to risk so much, a whole bunch of these resources, to save one. But they do it because the value for the performance of the group, of this bond, is so high. The high performance comes only from these dynamics. Now, what is the issue? That this is not our mode. We don't live in such groups. They're a rarity. You can find them in very special settings. And this comes to what Professor Piga was saying about you being a group. This is a very important experience for your future life. And because in a way you could reproduce these dynamics. And it is good, gratifying, and it's also good cognitively, because you understand what kind of mechanisms, we come from. Okay. We will do, in half an hour we will stop for a break, okay? Now, where do we live? We live in large organizations, basically, in secondary, for sure, mostly in secondary groups, where you don't know everybody. You do not know most of the people. How can you trust them? Our culture is very much characterized by individualism and fragmentation of sociality. We have many groups we belong to a leader, and which is not our default modality of being. Our leaders are far away. We see them on TV or also in an organization like this. I don't know how often you can see your director of the department. So there is a depersonalization through all these procedures and bureaucracy, which is in some measure needed, but there is objectively a depersonalization of the relationships. There is a bureaucratization, and the collaboration is not an emotional, most of the time, link. It's not an emotional relationship. And it's much more difficult to ensure the perception of justice and fairness in a large organization, because the diversity of the situations, the difficulty of the information exchange to know exactly what's happening there, how much imbalance there actually is in the complexity of our systems is high. It's difficult to really ensure a good perception. There is always a niche, there is always a casta, there is always, so this aspect that we highlighted before is always critical also in the small group. Here becomes very difficult to implement. So what is the answer? The answer, we can find the answer only in the culture that has produced all this complexity, that has produced these large organizations. And if we want to have a high effectiveness, and today we must also say a high efficiency because of the resources, collective action, we need strategies. We need the capability to understand what happens, to understand the fundamental mechanism and their declination, their development in the broader context, and pursue this high effectiveness collective action in our big organization, which is not a default mode. Now you could say, but we are much richer. We will see that right away. Much richer than once. We have a much better life than once. But this comes from specific modalities that we built, like technology, like in any way the bigger markets, the capability to network knowledge, and so on and so forth. Again, my idea is that if you want to bring forward this to very high performances in organizations, you must go beyond that and go back to some strategy and recover for some aspects or develop some strategies to promote some modes which are very important for our beings. So nature is the one that you saw coming from this very long tape, but culture is much faster, much more adaptable. Culture can be steered, the leadership can influence culture, and culture can find new modes to leverage knowing ourselves, who we are, and do better in our performances, in our governance. If you have things to say, please raise your hands. Let's go ahead. This is another inference of our transposition to large organizations of the collective dynamics. Too often, for us, leadership is the leadership of the leader, great leaders. This is in no way sufficient or adequate. No way. Leadership is necessary at all levels. From the small group, a corporal, which has 4 people, 5 people, his leadership is extremely important. And so a lieutenant, I'm talking about our organization, and so a captain, and so on. Leadership must go to the small group, to the strategic level. There are some differences in this kind of leadership, but go ahead. Leadership is one. Leadership is a system, must be a system. When it is not a system, it is not effective. And that explains why it is not enough to have elites which have good education and good knowledge. We need to diffuse this capability at all levels, from the top to the very bottom of the organizations. And devise leadership as a system, not as the performance of some brilliant guys. What can be these strategies? Otherwise we stay too much at the conceptual level. For example, is to promote cohesion of the small groups. Teaching people on having trust in small groups is a way to, a precondition to teach them to trust larger organizations which are more difficult to trust. And this is a specific line of command, of my command. I try to promote small groups. And one may say, yeah, but these small groups, then they are individual cells which maybe are in conflict between themselves. This can very well happen, and this is pretty much normal. But then you have to find mechanisms to build cohesion between the small groups. It's a second order problem. But if you don't solve the problem of teaching people having trust, I think you have no hope. There is a very interesting research, an old research, one of the most interesting books that I read, which is The Civic Tradition in the Italian Regions or something, Making Democracy Work, Robert Putnam, which has led a 20-year quantitative research in Italy about some indicators of civic tradition. And the basic finding that I was especially interested in is that the regions where there was a very intense small group life, for example with guilds, with mutual organizzazioni di mutuo soccorso. They have a specific name, but I don't remember it. And which the regions which had a very thriving life, decentralized life of groups for different reasons. They had in their culture, in their fundamental basic culture, a much higher level of trust. And it's amazing to see how that reflects on a map, on the economic and the institutional performance, for example. And in my book, one of the perspectives is historical perspective, I said, and I took this research, which was very well fit in the overall frame of the book, and this is a book that everybody should read, Putnam, Making Democracy Work. And it was also translated in Italy, but of course it's not, you cannot find it that anymore in Italian, you must find it in English. Okay, so then push transfer of key small group dynamics to larger groups. There are some instruments to do that. And leaders must know these instruments. Now we don't have time to do this, but using some, the communication is fundamental. Mission, vision, these are communication tools which implemented in a frame of actions that can help to push the transfer of key small group dynamics to larger groups. Internal communication is fundamental. We started a very aggressive internal communication program in our institute, leading at the strategic level. And now we come to the next step. In larger organizations, we still need group interaction. We still need effective leadership. We still need close leadership. We still need collaboration and attention to people and perception of justice and fairness. What we needed in the small group, we need in the larger organizations. But, let's go ahead. That's not easy to achieve. And here there is the proposal of some guidelines which are by no means, the definite answer to this problem. They are just thoughts, and they are also a little old. But, because this is a paper that I wrote in 2000, in year 2000, and was published in a few places. Strategic leadership and the narrow mind. What we don't do well and why. Let's go ahead. Okay, go ahead. The narrow mind. Why do we talk about narrow mind? Remember where we come from. Our brain today is exactly the same as the one as a Paleolithic hunter-gatherer. Exactly. This is science. It's not my thesis. So our brain is made for this kind of environments. simpler environments. Then this brain was able to build culture with a very high degree of sophistication. Let's go ahead. We have seen that, this is the environment we were talking about. Limited time horizon, small group, simple economy. Let's go ahead. Now we need something else to use culture, because we cannot use nature, to adapt to this larger organization. And we need the capability to think strategically, to think beyond today or the next year, and to think beyond our small group, but at much broader contexts. So strategic thinking is a specific skill that must be nurtured, and it is the core of strategic leadership. We have seen before that we need leadership at the small group level, and we need leadership at all levels up to the strategic level. Now, to do that at the small level, you need the capability to relate emotionally. You must have clear ideas of the basic mechanism of the small group. At the strategic level, you need something else. You need specific cognitive capabilities. And these cognitive capabilities must be developed very early. This is another reason why I really appreciated this invitation from Professor Piglia, because this experiment, I think, goes exactly in that direction. Strategic thinking is decisive. If you do a mistake at the strategic level, the damage is huge. And we have seen uncountable great mistakes at the strategic level. And these mistakes have caused incredible damage, incredible sufferance. The wars, if you think of the wars of the last century, they were failures in strategic leadership most of the times, the very beginning, all of them. The distraction that they brought was incredible. And also to more recent things. We don't have time, but we really could discuss hours of the failures of such kind. And the strategic thinking is low density in this world. It is necessary for strategy making. You remember when we said we must develop strategies to make our large organization effective. To devise good strategies, you must have some cognitive capabilities, specific cognitive capabilities. Okay, let's go ahead. So we will see why strategic thinking is such an elusive skill. We have seen that because our brain is not really made for that, as this thin gray layer, which is very good at focusing in specific fields and doing linear reasoning. Very good. Our technologies are of this kind, cell phones, computers, and so on. And we will offer some ideas to pursue it. Let's go faster. Our mind still breaks complex problems in simple parts to be handled in limited short-term memory. This is the analysis, what has been called since many years back, analysis. We can deal, our mind, with this thin gray layer of cells, can deal with a limited number of variables. Struggles to consider second, third, or fourth order consequences. And, this is very important, shows overwhelming trends to see things from one's own point of view. Our emotions color our pictures, the perception of reality. Sometimes they completely override our judgment. So, Evolution has not tailored our brain to highly complex systems, but if we have not changed, our world has changed enormously in those two, especially in those 2/10 of millimeters at the very end of the tape. In those 2/10 of millimeters. Our farmers, 200 years ago, didn't live much differently from the Roman farmers. Today the world is completely different. We live in a very complex world. I think I don't need one back. I think I don't need to expand on this. How complex is this world? How many people will interact with? How much information we get every day? We can have. We are overflowed by that. Here there is just a